Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean told me that on the second last day of the general election campaign, a middle-aged lady came up to him, a little agitated. She asked him, "Mr. Teo, is it true? My friends tell me it's okay to vote for the opposition because the government will still be in charge. All the programs the government has promised, they will deliver. MRT, upgrading, new facilities, polyclinic. So don't worry. All the things will still get done and the PAP will work even harder for you. You get everything they promised and 2 persons working for you instead of 1. She was very perturbed and asked him, "Mr. Teo, is that true?" Her question really was, how can this be true? It troubled her profoundly that she did not know how to rebut the argument. Yet in her heart of hearts, she knew instinctively that something was very wrong.
The second clarification deals with the anecdote the Prime Minister shared about a lady who spoke to Senior Minister Teo, and that choice, the difficult choice she had to make about I can vote the PAP, so there'll be enough people voting for the PAP, they will be the government. But there are also people who are saying 2 for 1. This is an old issue. It's come up before in previous elections. And there's also another side of the coin. That's one perspective. There are conversations that opposition MPs hear, like Mr. Singh. Why is it that when new citizens go to the CC, the elected MP is not there? Isn't the elected MP who may be who is an opposition candidate not part of this larger political firmament? Isn't that unfair? And there are other questions too, and these have come up as well. More recently, I put up a post about restarting Meet the People sessions, and a pro-establishment Facebook page goes on and says, hey, look at them trying to engender sympathy from the public by doing MPS sessions at the Void Deck. And of course, people come up to me when I go on the ground, walk the markets, and they say, Mr. Singh, is it true? Actually, the government says you can build your own offices. I say that's true. The position changed in 2011. The position in 1991, prior to 1991, HDB built offices for everybody, every MP, including opposition MPs. And then they stopped in 1991. Why did they stop? Because the argument was there was a competing need for void deck space. Even though in later parliamentary sessions, that number is only 1%, I understand. That was dedicated for that purpose. And then in 2011, the position changed. And so we have to deal with some of this reality as well. Poor understanding, call it what you want, of the situation. People feeling that there's something inherently unfair. And so when they say, I want the PAP in government, but I also want an opposition, they are giving voice to the situation many Singaporeans actually feel, which is, we want an opposition in this house. There must be an opposition in this house. So my duty and the duty of my colleagues is to be responsible about our roles. It's not easy. We come under pressure too from our own supporters. But as the Prime Minister rightly said, I think we owe our loyalty to something larger. And we will do our best by Singaporeans. And if we're not good enough, we deserve to be voted out. And that's how the system should work.
Now on SM Teo's anecdote and Mr. Pritam Singh's arguments, his arguments do not respond to the anecdote, because the basic point is this: whatever happens, there will be opposition MPs elected into this house. It's assured by our constitution And it has worked out, and the opposition has been making use of this system. The Workers' Party in the last election had NCMPs, PSP in this term have NCMPs. There will be opposition in this House to hold the party to account, to hold the government to account. So if you think the government is doing the wrong thing in terms of MPs' offices, in terms of the MPs and the community centres, by all means vote the government out, put a new government in, change the government, change the policy. But if you say vote against the government because somebody else will look after getting the PAP government, and you just become a free rider and you vote opposition, no harm, the PAP will still be there, then I think the system must fail. Because the system can only work if people vote sincerely, honestly, in accordance with what they really want, and to produce a result which matches their true intentions. And if they vote tactically, the consequence must be one day they will get the result which they marked the X for, but which they did not intend. And I think that's a wrong thing to teach people to do. You go to the elections, you vote for the person whom you have trust in, who will run your system, who will run your government. And our system is designed so that if you do that, it will be stable. If you don't do that, I think you're courting trouble. I can understand why Mr. Singh, as leader of the opposition and not in a position yet to challenge the government, would like to make this argument that the government PAP will be there, don't worry, you can safely vote for me, I'm not going to be the next PM. But I put it to you that that is not the right thing to do morally, and is not the right thing to do for Singapore.
The first one about the free rider. I don't think the residents in Aljunied, Hougang for 30 years now, and even Sengkang as a result of the results of the last election, would appreciate being called free riders. They're not free riders. Residents of Aljunied, I can speak more authoritatively for Aljunied residents because I'm a sitting MP there. We're not just doing nothing, having been voted in. We're not just letting the other guy, the government of the day, do something. We've got to do what we have to do. We've got to run the town council, which is why Mr. Lee Kuan Yew conceived of the town councils in the first place. Because if you want to move forward in the system as an opposition member of parliament, you've got to prove your worth in the town council. And we've had growing pains. I think nobody, I'm not going to deny that. But if we were bungling things up, I wouldn't be here today. My team wouldn't be here today. We've tried our best in the circumstances that we are in. The Sengkang team is not going to have an easy time. First term, it's always going to be tough. But the residents the voters of these constituencies put their faith in us because they know an opposition in parliament is ultimately good for Singapore. And it's not just, and if I can suggest this, it's not just the NCMP version of the opposition. With full respect to everyone who's an NCMP in this parliament and those that came before. But it's when you have elected opposition MPs that the government listens harder. And that means something to people. That's my view. I'm sure people the PAP may have a different view on it. But that's my perspective. And that's why it's so important for there to be elected opposition MPs. The Prime Minister spoke about a dishonest sort of packaging of what I'm suggesting. The bigger moral imperative that I have, and it's a huge burden, and I felt this burden before the last elections, was whether the people who are standing as candidates could follow through. That's the heaviest decision. That's the heaviest burden that I have. And if you choose someone who is not committed, not vested, that's the biggest pain for me. as the leader of one party that aspires to represent Singaporeans in Parliament. So I'll have to do what is good and what is right by Singapore. Looking for the best people. Do I want to contest all the seats, more seats, slowly grow? A lot of it turns on the quality of people that come and are attracted by the Workers' Party and our platform. If Singaporeans are attracted to it, then sure, there's a prospect of growth, but it's not growth for growth's sake. I'm not desperate for power, Prime Minister. But we've got to get good people if we want to bring this country forward. The PAP have been doing that, as the Prime Minister has alluded. At this point in our growth, I think we have to grow our roots as a loyal opposition. After more than 50 years of independence, this is the first time the government has recognized the office of the leader of the opposition. We have many, many more miles to go. But we're not chasing a destination. We intend to do right by Singapore.
I appreciate Mr. Pritam's explanations. I in no way undervalue his motivations, his passion, his desire to do right by Singapore, his wish to have a high-quality opposition built up in Singapore. I understand that. I think it's good for Singapore that you have honest people in the opposition, people who believe in what they're trying to do, people who will stand up and fight for their ideals, and from time to time disagree very strongly with the government. I think that's entirely reasonable. I think it's also good that you have opposition who take their town council responsibilities seriously, who look after their constituencies assiduously, conscientiously, and do their best for their MPs, and give the MPs a reason to vote for them. I think it's entirely reasonable to tell, but what I would say, however, is if you stand and you tell people, vote for me, I will be a better MP than the other one, than the PAP MP. I think that's entirely reasonable. But if you say, vote for me, somebody else will vote for the PAP, and therefore the PAP will be the government. That, the economists will call a free rider. It means that you're taking advantage of somebody else who's doing the duty of electing a government for the nation, and you're not doing your part, expressing your true views and preference as a voter, whom you want to be the next government. And if everybody takes that attitude, then you're going to end up with a government which you don't want. Because the argument which he makes is that he's very careful. He only chooses candidates he can trust to be Workers' Party candidates. I think I give him that. It's the right and responsible attitude to take. But I think other opposition parties may say they have been trying to get good candidates too. And they could make the same argument as you have, that it's good to have an opposition in Singapore. Vote for us. Somebody else will look after the government of Singapore. So supposing that the PSP had been as persuasive as Mr. Pritam Singh, and the SDP had been as persuasive as Mr. Pritam Singh, and more voters had taken such an attitude, where would Singapore be? Is that the right outcome for Singapore? So therefore, something is wrong when you say, I really want one government, but I will vote for another one. And the system will go wrong when you do that. And I think it is necessary that people understand this and understand what is at stake when you elect a government of Singapore. Elections are not just about the town council, they're also about electing the government for the country. And that's necessary for people to bear firmly in mind.